Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Monalisa Bhagat, and I'm a manager with RiskPro India. RiskPro India is a risk management and consulting firm, and we are in this business for more than 10 years. We have served more than 525 clients, which include international clients from UK, USA, UAE, etc. We have our main head office in Mumbai and presence in 7 other cities. We have our 5 main business verticals: risk advisory, IT advisory, training, technology, and recruitment. In risk advisory, we help our clients with internal audits, internal financial controls, legal compliance audit, branch audits, SOPs, fraud and investigation, etc. In IT advisory, we help our clients for GDPR compliance, SSAE 18, PDP reviews, 21 CFR, cybersecurity, HIPAA, and many such more services. In training, we provide online and classroom training in enterprise risk management, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery and corruption, risk assessment and mitigation, and many more. In technology, we have our in-house software, that is third-party risk management software. And with the help of our technology partners, we provide softwares like internal audit, risk management, legal compliance, whistleblowing, and many such other more softwares. In recruitment, we provide full-time and part-time risk and audit professionals and virtual risk managers. We are proud to bring to you RiskPro Academy, which is an online portal for risk and compliance courses. Request you to browse through our courses from the category Audit and Fraud, InfoSec, Cybersecurity, Data Protection, Risk and Compliance, Data Privacy. Please do visit our website www.academy.riskpro.in. Today's webinar is for 60 minutes, out of which 10 minutes will be for question and answer session. All the participants during the webinar will be on mute mode, that is listen only mode. If any participant would like to ask any questions, would request them to write it in the questions tab. If any participant is facing any issue like listening to the speaker or viewing the presentation, would request them to write in the questions tab, and we shall look into the same. The speaker for today's webinar is Mr. Syed Faraz, who is from Auditory. Auditory is a startup founded in 2019, specializing in financial audit offshoring. Their team has Big Four experience and provides their services remotely through a secure cloud infrastructure hosted in Amazon Web Services. They are presently serving clients based in Australia. The founders have collective experience in 3 Big Fours in both client-facing audit, Indian GAAP, and offshoring audit, US GAAP and IFRS. They are members of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and one of them is also a member of American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. They have experience leading an audit and seeing through its completion end-to-end. They also understand nuances involved in offshoring audit. Mr. Syed Faraz is one of the co-founders of Auditory. He is a chartered accountant with experience in audit and assurance, fraud investigation, risk management. His other areas of interest are creativity, critical analysis, and public speaking. He has also authored an article on fraud investigation. I would now like to hand it over to Mr. Syed Faraz.
Yep, thanks, Marisa. Thanks everybody for joining. Let me share my screen and get started. Yeah, so if somebody can confirm if they can see my screen and hear me fine.
Yes, Mr. Faraz.
Yeah, all right, great. So happy Friday, everybody. I'm in my Friday casuals and I try to keep the tone also casual. That's the way I prefer communicating, right? I think that way we understand each other better, right? I mean, the best conversations happen over a coffee. So rather than, in the parliament, I would say, or something like that. So getting started without much ado, the topic for today is seminar is why does audit offshoring fail, right? So we deliberated a lot about what could be the topic, what is something that might interest people. Well, we can talk a lot about the advantages, the benefits of audit offshoring. That's something that everybody speaks about, but what we do not focus on is why does it fail, right? Why isn't it the multi-billion-dollar industry that it can be, right now, and what are the ways that we can make it succeed? So what are the various touch points we have today, right? So we'll be discussing about audit offshoring, a brief about that, the procedures that we are offshoring, what is the general trend, major offshore locations, the things that the points that I've mentioned until now would form part of the minor part of the talk, because you need to have some background before we get into the main part, which is the challenges and the solutions. All right. So talking about the workflow, Sam, how does the clock tick in an offshoring ecosystem, right? And this is not just peculiar to audit. This is something that is common across all offshoring, right? So when we have taken an example of New York City, all right. So discounting the times, the daylight savings, typically this is how it would be. When it is 5:30 p.m. for us in India, it would be 8 a.m. for them in US, right? So we can schedule meetings at 5:30 p.m. We can schedule meetings at, let's say, 7 p.m. here, which is not late considering the corporate work culture we have right now, right? I mean, 9 to 5 jobs are passy anyways. So this is how it would work. Now, what is one of the most highlighted benefits of this setup is this, right? So from an audit perspective, somebody who's been part of the local side of the audit and the offshore side of the audit, I'm talking about myself, I understand that there are certain challenges in audit which are beyond our control, which is beyond the control of the auditors, right? So if we have, let's take a scenario where there are 10 people, right, in the US working on a particular audit client. All right. So they go to the audit client, right? And in the morning, they make a list of items that they need from the client. Okay. And when they make this list, um, they the client in turn takes its time, and now I'm just using 1 day's turnaround example, right, just for simplicity's sake. And they send them the list of PBC is provided by client for those of you not from audit background. So the client takes its time to prepare this PBC, and let's say the client gives it to us in the evening, right? I mean, if it gives it to you the same day, you're lucky, but I'm just, like I said, an ideal scenario. So the client gives it to you at 5:30 p.m. or let's say it gives it to you at 7 p.m. your day in the US, right? So the 10 professionals that were sitting there wanting to do audit, their time has not been utilized effectively, because all they've done the entire day is wait for the data. Now let's suppose we divide these 10 into time zones of in IST and EST. So 5 of the audit professionals are in the US and 5 of the audit professionals are in India, right? So when these 5 go to the US client and request for the data, they get the data at the end of the day, which is in the evening, right? In the first scenario, all the 10 professionals could come back next day only and start the work. Whereas in this scenario, 5 professionals who are in India can begin the work the same day, which is morning for them. And by the time the US professionals come back next day, a lot of work is already completed, right? So we have kind of, you can say 8 hours plus 8 hours, or you want to call it a 24-hour work day, but at least 16, 18 hours work day, right? So that way you get things moving very fast. And you would understand in an audit environment, in the audit industry, time is of absolute essence, right? That's the reason why our jobs are very seasonal, right? We have something called as the busy season or seasons, right? If from a US perspective, that busy season would fall usually between Jan and March, when we have filings to be done, the SEC filings, whether it is a small company, large company, whatever it is, right? 90 days, 60 days, 45 days, whatever it is applicable for that company, we need to complete the audit before that so that the client can file the data on time. So can the solution be for us to start the audit earlier? Well, keeping the interim part of things aside, largely we cannot, right? Because there's that issue of timing in audit. So once the books of account are closed in December, then you can start the work in Jan, and you don't have much time. And if your client is a large accelerated client, then you got to complete everything within 45 days, right? So you can imagine the amount of the urgency that is always there, right? Okay, these are some quick pointers about, how the audit offshoring process works. So you select an offshoring partner. So the US firm would select a partner. I'm not talking about the big fours, because big fours have their own exclusive offshoring partners, but the other mid-size and smaller firms, they have to choose one of the various partners that they have available to them. Then they agree on what audit procedures to be offshore, the pilot engagement selection. We do a team introduction, then relevant data shared for the audit procedures to be performed, regular updates through calls, SMS, emails. We would have queries for them. When I say we, right, I'm talking from an offshore point of view, right? And when I say them, I mean the onshore, the US side of things, US, Australia, whatever. Then offshore review, we do review from here. Then we deliver the work to onshore. They do the review from their end. If there are any clarifications, we provide that. Then we receive the feedback. This is generally the cycle that goes in any offshore work. And the phases, when we say phases, we mean the progress of an offshoring firm or the progress of a tie-up between onshore and offshore, right? So the beginning phase is, well, it's testing the waters basically, right? So they offshore non-core basic functions which are high volume, which are routine, etc., right? Where the risk is relatively lower. Once they get comfort that, all right, the team is performing well, why don't we test them with a little more complicated process? Then they give us more work, which could also be non-core, but this time it's a little more complex. A mature offshore center would be something where we are hand in glove with our onshore counterparts. Not just that, we are also directly now liaising with the client. So essentially, there is no difference between onshore team and offshore team. So like I said, 5 members in the US, 5 members in India. They are basically doing the same interchangeable work. So that's an mature offshore position, and that is an ideal position that we should strive to be in. We can do risk assessment, internal controls, substantive testing, confirming accounts. But like I said, this is risk assessment. Internal controls would go more into the mature phase, but analytical review we can do in a more beginning phase. Client financial statements is one of the most classic job that is offshore, right? So they prepare a draft financial statement and they send it to us for checking the, whether it's a PY, the numbers are tying, whether the document is consistent internally, right? The cross tie outs, as we call it, we do the casting, the footing to check the mathematical accuracy, etc. Now we have received some Australian specific trend data, right, as to how much work gets offshored. And if you look at the big fours, they are standing at 22%. But generally, big fours have a policy within themselves, and I think this is common across big fours. I can speak from EY and KPMG standpoint because I've worked with these two. We, from KPMG specifically, for public clients, right, that are listed on the stock exchange in the US, the policy is we would not be offshoring more than 20%, right? But for private clients, that percentage can go up to 40%. So when you combine the two, this is where we arrive at. It's about 22%, which is kind of, borderline basic and intermediate phase. Mid tiers are still in the basic phase, right? There's just 15%, and there's a lot of scope for that to increase. Mid tiers, I would say, even the big tens, Grant Thornton or your Moose Stephens, BNI, the what are these PKF, right? All of these I would class them there, and they are offshoring about 15%, partly because they don't have an exclusive center, and partly because their exclusive center, even if they do have, is not as mature and not as advanced as the big fours. Yeah. Why isn't it so? We will discuss that. Small firms are going about 43%, right? Now this is where, and there's a lot of scope to increase that as well. See, in my experience, I have both external audit and internal audit experience. So in my internal audit experience, there are certain clients that I've managed, right? As manager, I've managed clients where the integration is up to 89%, right? So one of my biggest clients, I was the sole manager, and I was sitting here out of India. There was not a single staff in the US, right? There was just the US partner. I'm the manager. I'm managing the client from here, and we get the work delivered. And this is a very critical client for for the big four that I was working for. So So we can get there basically, right? So we can get there, and how do we get there is something that we will discuss. Now, this is again a trend with regards to the locations. India stands, I mean, it's a clear leader, right? China is following up closely, but India has a lot of other advantage in terms of people's skills and the language skills, right? There's Malaysia catching up very fast, Indonesia, etc. When you talk about the more advanced economies like US or UK, I think this is not from a perspective of cost effectiveness, but from a perspective of talent availability. There might not be certain talents which are in your home country, so you have people from the US, UK. Maybe you're let's say movie making, right? So advanced movie editing. Maybe you don't have someone as advanced to make a movie as something like Avatar or something like that in India. So you are forced to go to the US and UK to get your job done. But otherwise, most of the other ones, Philippines, for example, is a very common, one is mostly for reasons of cost, right? Slowly the trend is catching up where the reason for offshore is going beyond cost. It's going for the reasons of skills as well. If you look at some of the examples, let's say data analytics, right? Data analytics in audit is a very new and upcoming field. So for the big four that I was working, one of the other big fours, previous big four that I worked for, data analytics was mostly focused in India and other Indian subcontinent countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc. Right? So these are the countries where these subject matter experts in data analytics were focused, were concentrated. So it was in such a manner that I had to teach an assistant manager there as to how data analytics is done in audit, right, from here. So as a senior, right, not as a manager, but when I was a senior, I was the subject matter expert of data analytics from here, and I had to teach him, the assistant manager abroad, as to how it works, how the tool works, how we do the analysis, etc. So that's a classic example of skill offshoring, not just cost based offshoring. Time zones, again, this is not so much of a consideration, if I may say, but to some extent it matters. I mean, if you talk about Middle East, India is closer to Middle East. If you talk about US, perhaps Brazil is closer to the time zone. And if you talk about Australia, perhaps Philippines could be close. So that way, maybe people look at that in a way, but in my experience, that time zone per se has not been a primary way of consideration, primary consideration. Of course, it saves time. I give you an example of how 18-hour, 16-hour work day can save time and get things done faster. Expanded capacity, yes, you can add, or you can quickly. I mean, if you're not hiring people full time, but if you're hiring people on contract basis, you can quickly upscale yourself depending on client projects. Time zone differences we discussed. Diverse pool of skilled employees, yes. Data analytics focused in Indian subcontinent, and core audit procedures focused in US, and so on. Can provide certain value added services as well. Technological advancements. Offshoring challenges, this is the main theme of our talk today, right? So this is what we'll spend most of our time in. What are the challenges? Okay, and we will discuss each of these challenges in greater detail. We've got the performance risk, data security. We just broadly categorize them into these things, and we will discuss subcategories. Performance risk. What we mean by performance risk? Location specific risk, right? So you can have this is mostly beyond control, right? But it's a risk nevertheless. There could be natural disasters. There are places which are prone to volcanoes and earthquakes and whatnot. Then currently the pandemic is also something that is an issue of concern, because if trainers from abroad cannot freely come to the country and train people there, or monitor there, or review the operations over there, then that becomes a risk. Complexity in work. Standard work can have standard results, expectations. Problems might arise when work gets complicated on the go. How much can standardization be done, right? See, I have worked in both setups. I've worked in setups where standardization was the order of the day, and in setups where there was absolutely no standardization. It was completely dependent on the skill and the caliber of the person sitting in the offshore location doing the work, right? But standardization, I think standardization, what happens is you really are not breeding thinkers. You just, I mean, the job that the person you were doing in a standardization setup is more or less something that perhaps robots in the future can do. Yeah, and so this person might get redundant in the near future. But when you're creating, and not to mention the cost and effort and time that goes into standardizing work, immense amount of cost and effort, immense, right? You need to set a continuously monitor team. So in one of the big fours, we had a team called quality and risk management. Of course, QRM, as they say it, is something that is common across firms. But in this specific big four, this QRM had a very large role to play, very large role. There was always a staff of, let's say, 50 or so, that was full-time staff that only did QRM work, right? And there were US rotationals, right? People came from US seniors and managers and directors who would come to our location and stay here, right? So always on the floor, you have these US seniors, managers, and directors sitting there, and they move on rotation as well. But any given point in time, you already have some close to 10 US professionals sitting there. You got to pay for their salaries and whatnot, right? So huge amount of cost and huge amount of time and effort that goes into standardization, which is I think I would say more of a drawback than benefit. So how do you counter that, right? How do you counter that? We will discuss. Quality, multiple clients with different standards, different clients want things done different ways. Different staff also have different standards. Then decreasing quality with more workload. So if you talk about big fours, you think about lack of work-life balance, right? So they pay well, right? They pay their staff well, but at the same time, the work that is to be done is extremely intensive, right? They do not believe in, usually, I mean, they largely don't believe in contractors, right? So come busy season, they are completely reliant on their full-time staff. Yeah, so we've got, like I said, it could be 45 days, 60 days, 90 days. They have to completely rely uh, on their full-time staff, because the quality expectation, the standard of quality in big fours is so high, they cannot bring in contractors at short notice, get them up to speed to that quality, and then get them up and running. So they rely on the full-time staff, and because they rely on the full-time staff is extremely pressured. I mean, some of you might be from big fours and you relate to what I'm saying. Um, there would be cases where you do not come back home in the night, right? You come back home in the morning, you work through the night. I have done that, my colleagues have done that. It's something that, and when you have so much amount of workload, at the end of the day, we're human beings, right? So it's natural that quality might suffer. Yeah, so that's one aspect. Power supply, uninterrupted power supply and connectivity is also a lot of these offshore locations, especially with the third world country or some developing country, sometimes power supply issues and all that might be a cause of concern. Yes, you have UPS and power backup and whatnot, but there's only so much that those certain tools can help you. I've had staff coming and telling me, Faraz, there's no power supply for the entire day, right? Since morning till evening, there's been no power supply. There's a power cut. There's some work that is going on. I've used my UPS for 4 hours, right? Now even the UPS power is going off. Now, you see, I mean, we're working from home, isn't it? From a long time now, I think for 1.5, 2 years or what, we're working from home, and you cannot expect people to have like a huge corporate type power generator at home, right? They can only have a UPS, and that will only give you power supply to a certain time. After which, again, we've had loss of hours. In fact, we started making a tracker, right, to track how many hours we lost in a day due to power supply cuts. And when you look at the tracker, every single day we've had cases where people lost their power, they could not work anymore. And this is a cost that we will have to observe. Generally, this kind of issue is more prevalent in the not so developed and developing countries. Workflow issues, errors, resource, knowledge transfer, time charge, queries, errors, lack of proper review as per agreed protocol, right? Any deliverable to onshore should have been reviewed. See, this is all interconnected issue. Errors, quality, the talent pool, skill, all of this is interconnected issue. Now let me focus over here because it is kind of interconnected. So let me talk about quality and talent pool for a bit. Yeah. Now, why are we not attracting quality talent, right? Why are we not attracting quality talent in offshore locations? Yeah, in offshore firms. See, I have worked in onshore, I have worked in offshore, and I can tell you, I'm not going to mince my words here. The the skill level, the caliber of people, of the professionals, right from the analyst level up to the director level, there's a huge gap. there's a huge difference between onshore and offshore, right? I would equate an onshore senior. When I say onshore, I mean the local practice India audit, right? So when I have worked in the India audit, local India audits, and I have worked in the US offshore audits. So I'm comparing the two, and I'm telling you, perhaps a senior in the local practice audit can do the job of a manager, assistant manager, or maybe even a manager in the offshore. Why is that? Why do we have this gap? The professional in onshore is also a chartered accountant. The professional in offshore is also a chartered accountant. So why this gap? So to understand that, we got to realize one thing, right? We might become chartered accountants, we might become qualified accountants, CPAs, engineers, and lawyers, and doctors, and whatnot. But our education only gives us the entry. It gives us the push to entry, right? But how we take it forward from there is entirely dependent on the experience we gather, right? For me, most of my majority of my learning, I would say 80% or so, has come from my work, right? I borrowed from my academic knowledge only in the beginning stage of my career. Post that, yes, there was continuous professional learning. You update, okay, you look at this update, that update, accounting update, auditing update, that way you update yourself. But then uh, what really matters, ultimately what really helps you, is the experience that you've gained, right? And when you start off in an Indian audit atmosphere, right, the local practice atmosphere, over there, you are doing end-to-end audit. You don't have a choice. You really don't have a choice. 100% of the audit, you're doing it. I have done audits right from engagement letter, okay, to the billing. Yeah, I have managed audit myself as even an articled assistant, right? So that is an opportunity that offshore guys are not getting. Why are they not getting that opportunity? This is a multifaceted question, right? This is not, you cannot pin the blame on just one thing. But let us list down a few issues. Why is it that offshore guys don't get the kind of experience that the onshore guys are getting? Number one is, I mean, there's not in any specific order. I'm just listing it down. One is the US regulations, European regulations, Australian regulations, right? The regulations over there, which are preventing companies from offshoring more and more work to India. Now, are you telling me that there's a percentage fixed by US? Let's take US as an example, right? So has US fixed a percentage? Guys, you know what? Companies, you cannot offshore more than say 20%, or you cannot offshore more than 40%. Is that the case? No, there isn't such a case. Then why are Big Fours putting this percentage of 20%, 40%? That is because um, many times the PCAOB, the SEC, or the AICPA, whatever these accounting bodies are and regulatory bodies are, they are raising questions. They're raising questions, and these questions usually are directed at the Big Fours. They're raising questions. They're saying, look, you guys are in audit, yeah? How come you're offshoring your audit to somebody who's miles away, right? I mean, the other diametrically opposite part of the world, right? How come you're offshoring them? They have absolutely no idea about the client in terms of physical visit, meeting the people, etc., the control systems. How do you get the comfort that they will be in a position to audit? Because the nature of audit is that audit is mainly observation, inquiry, investigation, right? How can you do observation? So imagine doing a murder investigation in US while sitting in India. Can you do that? So I gave a very radical example, but obviously audit is not that complex, because over there you have a lot of circumstantial evidence, but over here it's kind of relatable, and it was, right? I would say it was relatable. That's why these accounting and regulatory bodies started asking these questions to the firms. They're like, how can you do that? Did they set a percentage? Okay, now what? You know what? Nothing doing. Don't offshore more than 20%. Don't offshore. No, they didn't set a percentage, but Big Four consciously took this choice of limiting themselves. Okay, public company we will do 20%, private companies we will do 40%. I think this should satisfy the regulators. That is their internal judgment. But do the regulators go after the smaller firms, the private firms? In my knowledge and experience, they usually don't. They let them be, because the private firms are usually closely held companies, right? So the risk over there is much lesser as compared to the risk of the public companies, and blame it again on the various billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar frauds that have happened in the early 21st century, right? We're talking about Enron, so we're talking about WorldCom, etc. So many of these multi-billion dollar frauds have compelled the regulators to ask these questions, right? And if you look at the WorldCom fraud, right? Do you guys know for a fact that it was not Big Four? You know Big Fours, right? KPMG, EY, Deloitte, and PwC. But just 20 years back, it was not Big Four, it was Big Five. Yeah. So which was the fifth company? Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen was just as big as the other Big Fours, right? What happened to Arthur Andersen then, right? Why did it come down to Big Four? Because Arthur Andersen disappeared in thin air overnight, virtually overnight. Why? Because of their alleged role in the WorldCom fraud. Now, see, the accusation is not that auditors helped in the fraud, right? It is not that. What the accusation is the auditors did not follow the acceptable audit protocol in doing their audit, right? And because they did not follow the acceptable audit protocol in doing their audit, they were partly blamed for this fraud. Yeah, and Arthur Andersen, the fines that were levied on Arthur Andersen was something that they could pay and get away with. That was fine. The fine itself was nothing for the kind of size they had in more than 100, 150 countries. Their presence was there. The fines were nothing. They could have paid off the fines and got away with it. But the reputation hit. The reputation hit that they sustained, was something that made them evaporate in thin air. Now there's no more Andersen. Can you imagine one fraud? The reputation is so hit across the globe. Your firms are shut down, and you've gone bankrupt. So the Big Fours, the other Big Fours have learned their lesson. Learned a lesson from Arthur Andersen. They're taking this, borrowing a page from the Arthur Andersen manual of audit, of how not to do audit, and they want to keep it safe. And they're like, well, I know there's a price to pay by limiting work to 20%, 40%, but you know what, we are willing to pay that because we don't want. This is a question of survival of the firm itself. So they don't offshore more than that. So if you're working for a institutionalized, a seasoned company like a Big Four, then don't expect to do a lot of judgmental procedures, etc. Right? I know it is impacting your career, right? The Big Fours are like, boss, it might impact your career, but it's impacting our survival. So what can we do? They will not tell you that way. They will still try to be politically correct, and they will try to be motivational. They're like, you know what, whatever 40%, 20% you do it with great motivation and quality and whatnot, right? That's how they try to motivate it. But we know what it is, right? Let's call a spade a spade. That's something that's impacting career growth in terms of learning. So they pay. Their pay is the payment. The salaries in the offshore setup is comparable with the salaries in the onshore setup is comparable, right? But the growth is not comparable. The learning is not comparable. The opportunities that you get outside are not comparable. Yeah. So I think over here, what happens then is there's a huge benefit. There's a huge vacuum for the mid-size and the smaller firms to pitch in, to come in, and they say, you know what, the problem is mainly with the PCO, with the public companies, because public's money is at stake. But the private companies, who's got to lose? Is the private firm, the companies are closely held. Maybe it's a family-held business, or a few friends have gotten together and started a business. Why don't we increase the percentage over there? What's stopping us from that? And adding to that, right, the PCOB is not even set a percentage saying, you can't do anything beyond this or that. So why not explore it? This is where I think the mid-size can beat the Big Fours in terms of attracting talent pool, right? Like I said, when I'm doing internal audit offshore, I have done 90% of the work from here. As manager, I managed it here. So there is that possibility we can do, definitely, right? So Big Fours, whether they will change their approach or not is we'll have to wait and watch. But the mid-size and the smaller firms, they definitely have this low-lying fruit that we can pluck, right? So that is one reason, right? The percentage of work that is getting offshore, it's not because Indians don't have the skill set. Of course not. We do Indian audits here? Don't we do local practice? Don't we send our talented pool over there? Of course we have the talent. We have chartered accountancy over here in India is one of the toughest accounting exams in the world, right? Because going by the pass percentage, the pass percentage is perhaps the lowest as compared to any accounting body in the world, right? So it is pretty competitive. Yeah. So people have our guys are not behind. If they're not better, they're at least not behind the other accounting professionals in the globe. So that is not a problem. Skill set is not a problem. They can do it. You just need to teach them how to do it, and they'll do it. That is one issue, right? Regulations and the Big Four's rigidity about not offshoring more, and for their own reasons. Second thing is why we're not attracting. So because of this learning thing, and because of this, there is that aspect of the reputation, because the reputation is such that, hey, it's an offshore and I get branded as an offshore guy. When I go out in the market, my value will be so much lesser, right? So there's that issue of branding, of reputation. Yeah. And there's that issue of not having, because not having the tone at the top. So if you don't set a tone, if your top guy is not somebody who's one of the most talented leaders you can get, then that same effect will get trickled down to the rest of the firm, right? If he is subpar or she is subpar, he or she will then hire directors to help who are subpar, and they in turn will hire associate directors who are subpar, and they will hire managers who are subpar. That all depends in the interviews, isn't it? How they take the interviews, how they filter people in. They themselves are subpar, so obviously the people that they filter in would also most likely be subpar. So there's this tone at the top. This is also perhaps preventing the offshores get attracting good talent. Second, the final thing is growth opportunities. Growth opportunities over here are much lower and slower than it is over there, mainly because I would say mainly because of the standardization culture, right? Because of the standardization culture, if I am doing US audit, I will not do anything else. If I am doing Australian audit, I will not do anything else. And within the US audit, if I am doing data analytics, I won't do anything else. Within data, within the, again, within, let's say, Australian audit, if I'm doing SMSSF, I'm not going to do anything else. This is super specialization, like super specialization, which will disable me. So I'm doing data analytics, which is perhaps, the busy season for which is September to December, right? January onwards, I'm free because now I'm passing on the job to the core auditors. They are busy from Jan to March, and I'm just, hatching eggs. Yeah. So obviously, the output that I have is not comparable with the output that I would have in a local practice setup. So had I, attained those multiple skills, which is not difficult. See, if local practice guys can do it, offshore guys can do it as well. So if I can acquire those skills, then I can quickly, help the firm scale up. And if I help those firms scale, so I will not have to sit free from Jan to March. I'll be busy from September to December. I'll be busy from Jan to March as well. And when we hire more and more people, we can smoothen the workflow, and work-life balance can also get better. Yeah. So that is super specialization culture, the super standardization culture, right? The risk appetite, it's mainly because the risk appetite of the Big Four is not very high, right? But the medium-sized firms, I believe, can afford to do that to some extent. So if you do this, and obviously then you draw in more business, and if you draw in more business, obviously your guys can get better growth as compared to the better growth as compared to the existing offshore setup. So that is where I think that thing about attracting talent, quality talent is lacking. Now errors would come because lack of proper review. Why proper review? Because the guy who's reviewing itself is not of a high quality, right? So the professional who's performed it is not high quality. Professional who's reviewing is not of high quality. Then the deliverable that goes to the onshore is not of high quality. Resource monotonous jobs lead to high attrition, leading to lack of continuity in resources, right? Yes, exactly. See, monotonous jobs, sometimes we joke, when we go for coffee, when we are very busy, right? This is I don't approve of this joke, okay, but I'm just mentioning it as a point here to understand. We go for coffee, we steal a coffee break, right? Because we're so busy during busy season, we steal a coffee break, like, it's okay, dude, let's just push it, we need 10 minutes break, come on, let's have coffee. When we go to have coffee, right, we pass by the security guard, when we look at him, we're like, hey, you know what, this security guy, boss, he's actually very lucky, I mean, no work stress, no deadlines, nothing. He just had to sit whole day. But I'll tell you what, that job is as stressful, if not more stressful than your job. Sitting and doing nothing is actually very stressful, right? I have been in jobs which are monotonous. I have been in jobs that are more challenging. And the jobs which are more challenging are demanding of me physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. But I would still prefer that to sitting and doing nothing. Yeah, because sitting and doing nothing makes you frustrated, and that is monotonous, and that adds to your stress, and that will lead to high attrition as well. So if you do the super specialized, again, it goes back to that thing of super specialization and super standardization, etc. Unable to cope with demand due to growth, attracting right talent. Yes, this is what we discussed at length. Knowledge transfer, tacit knowledge, knowledge that is built over time with experience, it's difficult to transfer. Yeah, so we can't hire contractors in short notice and bring them up to speed and uh, upscale accordingly. Time charge. Now this is again, this is a, I think we should leverage technology over here. So there's this always, when you listen to people, when you look at the time that people have charged on clients, it would always be round figures. They will charge 8 hours, they will charge 4 hours, they will charge 10 hours. Okay, you would not get to see cases where people have charged 8.19 hours or 4.37 hours. Have you ever seen that? No. So does it mean that these 8 hours, 10 hours, 5 hours are absolutely honest? No, I mean, almost, I mean, you can be sure about it. It is not honest. It is either overcharged or it is undercharged. If you're overcharging it, that means you are not being ethical, right? And you are telling the client that, it just takes so much time, whereas it doesn't. And if you're undercharging it, then you're not doing justice to your firm. You're leaking revenue, isn't it? So one of the technological ways that our Big Four have seen do, and what we do at Auditory as well, is we have a timer, which have a timer for each project. So we click on the timer the moment we start the project, and even if you have to go for a coffee break or a loo break, you just pause the timer and come back again, start the timer, and automatically records the time, right? This way, we get as close to actuals as possible. Queries, a lot of queries while doing the work requiring the onshore team. Yeah, so again, time zone is a issue here, because over here there are a lot of queries which you would wait for the. So let's say the onshore team sent you a file with password and they didn't send you the password. What can you do, right? Can you call them at their 2 a.m. in the night to ask them, hey dude, can you please give me the password? No. Then you have to wait for them until they come onshore. So these are some things that will also prevent uh, effective and efficient collaboration. Reliability, or so I'll have to rush through a bit here. I think I'm running behind time. Trust issues, this goes without saying. Personal touch. When you meet somebody in person, the small talk, I mean, we cannot underestimate small talk really helps you a lot. This is what I learned in my local practice experience as well. When I go and be very, very professional and stiff, wearing my tie and whatnot, they are more hesitant in opening up. But when I loosen my tie, when I put my hand over this guy's shoulder and then, hey, hey, what do you like? Oh, you like this team? Which team are you supporting? And this and that. We get personal. Then obviously they'll be more willing to cooperate with us. And that is something that we don't have offshore, but we'll have to get ourselves somehow adjusted to this new way of working, and try to do that small talks, try to do that collaboration through technology. Goodwill, acting on good faith, competence, right? Whether the offshore guys have the competence to take it up or not, the client would have. This has been raised by the clients, right? So in many times, the client, I have seen an email, right, myself, where the client is sending an email saying, I have hired KPMG US, or I've hired KPMG Bahrain. I've not hired KPMG India. So why is Indian KPMG team, serving me? These kind of things that come up later on. So we'll have to build that trust. Language barriers. See, English language skills, right? See, places like Japan, you would say Japanese. Japan has a huge, immense potential for offshore, but they don't have much opportunities, mainly because of language skills. Similarly, Switzerland, yeah, Netherlands. These are all cases where there's immense. Switzerland pays the highest. If you look at the per hour cost of a audit senior, I would say Switzerland is number one in the world, which means if they get opportunities to offshore, then they will definitely offshore. But language skills are preventing that. And even in India, although English is pretty common, this is a very big cause of concern when we are dealing with our onshore counterparts, because a lot of times, first of all, they'll have to write detailed instructions, hey, go to this, open this file, go to this tab, click here, do that, copy here, paste that, each and every. If I have to give you such detailed instructions, I might as well get my niece who's in the private school to do this job. See, I have a lot of clerical jobs, right, in my personal life, I give it to her. Said, can you please help me with this? I'll get you a treat. I'll get you a shake. So she can do the job herself. Yeah, she's in her fifth standard or whatever. So why should you then need qualified auditors to go through this? Mainly one reason is because English language skills and technical skills. If I tell you, hey, take this file, do the substantive analytical review for this file, right? Is that person capable enough to do that thing without detailed instructions? If they're not, then that is a cause of concern over here. So you need to attract, again, goes back to attracting the right talent. Attract the right talent, pay them well, show them growth opportunities. Don't give them monotonous work. Avoid substandard, super specialization, super standardization, etc. Right? And that way you can attract better talent. Communication in English, right? So first of all, you should make sure the interviewer's English is good. Yeah, many times, the ADs and managers and that who interview, their own English is not that great. So obviously they're like, okay, my bar is so low, I'm gonna pass through guys whose bar is also low, right? And they have problems communicating with the onshore. Security is one of the biggest issues, right? I'll be very frank here. From auditory, there have been a lot of times where clients have come with our within hands grasp, right? And the IT security system that we have set up for ourselves is something that is at par with, I would say, is comparable with the Big Fours, right? Because we are from Big Fours, we wanted to set it up. In fact, I would, when Atif and myself were discussing this idea over tea, where we were working with the same Big Four, we kept on discussing, but nothing moved forward, right? Because we have ideas in the mind, but we don't know how to implement it. Because you need software guys to implement this. Because Big Four is doing it like this, and we just get the user interface. But how do we implement it? Then we came across two software guys who, we discussed this just like that, casually. We were working for some NGO, and we got acquainted, and they actually made this happen. So without those engineers joining in as partners, whatever our ideas would have stuck as ideas in our mind, and we would not have implemented them, right? So we implemented these. However, see, some clients are, when we take them through the demo, saying this is how our IT systems are, this is how our IT controls are, they're satisfied. But there are bigger clients who demand certifications, right? Some demand SOC2, some demand ISAE and different certifications, which are pretty expensive to go after, right? So that's something that we are in the process of getting, but we are already compliant with these compliances, because of which we get certain clients. But there are certifications there might prevent you from getting more clients. So that's an investment that we might have to make. GDPR in Europe, HIPAA, the thing about health information and personally identity, PII, PHI, those kind of information is not moving outside of the US shores. That is something that we need to keep in mind for the security aspect. Test runs, start small, yes. Communication, we discussed. Feedback, please take feedback, be open for feedback. Don't defend yourself. When your client is speaking, listen. You might have counters, but there's no point countering, because he or she is the one giving you the bread and butter, right? So please listen to the feedback, and please set controls in place which will ensure that no work goes out of your dashboard without review. Right, accreditation, we spoke about. Standard procedures and guidelines, yes. For IT, you need to have standardization, right? Not for the quality of the work, but for IT systems, you need to have entity level controls, which will help you prevent error and fraud. Generator backup updates, secured server. Yeah, now this is another thing, right? With the GDPR, the information, what they're requiring is, boss, this information is of a US citizen. I don't want this information to go outside of US. Not just that, they are more specific about this information is in the state of California. I want this information to not go outside of state of California. How do I do that? I do that by hosting a server within that state and making sure that all the work is done on that server. So in Auditory, for instance, we have a virtual desktop set up for each of our employees, and we have various controls which will prevent data from going outside of their virtual desktop and into their personal desktop. They can only work on their virtual desktop, and they cannot copy through USB or emails or anything. They cannot move data outside of it. So we are ensuring that they're sitting in India physically, but virtually they're working in California. Job rotation, yes, that is a time and tested way. Non-disclosure agreement in employment contracts, system controls, and not just that, you have to do every year annual independence trainings and various other compliance trainings. Secondments, so that we can learn, they can learn, and they can also come, so that the culture becomes more or less similar. email communication, yeah, we try and leverage. If there's an issue with an accent, right? So Bihari will have a different accent, a Tamilian will have a different accent, a Malayali will have a different accent, a US you will have a different accent, Texan will have a different accent, Irish guy will have a different accent, Australian will have a different. Australians speak very fast, and the UK guys speak slower, and there are various things that are there in the challenge, right? Point is, you don't have to change your accent, right? So, but then make sure when you're communicating, they understand. That's all matters. But if you're having challenges there, try and leverage the email communication, because we might pronounce the same word in different ways, but when it is written down, it will written the same way. In conclusion, we're looking at prioritizing selection of right offshore locations and unit entities. Start offshoring in phases. Okay, that way you have better understanding of your risk. Have agreed communication work protocols. Invest in a secured server. We use AWS or Auditory, for instance. Workshops and training. Either have it done by onshore guys, or make your A team very, very strong in offshore, so that they then trickle down the quality to everybody in the firm. Provide periodic feedbacks, accreditation, because a lot of firms are asking for this. Even if you're meeting the standard technically, but if you don't have the certification, then you might lose business. A face-to-face communication helps also improve the relationship between the firms. Okay, so that's about it. Thank you very much for listening patiently, and now